am the chair of the Department of Pharmacy Practice and Administration at the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, and I'm also the director of our online post-baccalaureate certificate in rural health disparities and social inequities. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll just turn over to my colleagues to tell you a little bit about themselves as well. And we can go according to the way that we're lined up here. So I see Lilia's next, Doretha, and then Star.
Excellent. I'm Lilia Macias-Moriarity. I am an associate professor at the School of Pharmacy at South University. I am not cool like Miriam, part of the PharmD side of the house. I'm the nerdy PhD side of the house. I'm an epidemiologist by training. And so that's my gig. And I have the opportunity and the pleasure of working with these wonderful women.
Am I next?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Doretha. I have a master's of public administration. My PhD is in public policy and administration. I specialize in public management and leadership. Right now, I'm an independent scholar, focusing on research. So as you'll see, we all have different backgrounds. So similar to what you all are doing, you know, we collaborated together to come up with this robust research topic, and we really, really appreciate being able to do this outside of academia, because up until now, we've only been speaking to faculty and students. So this is really, really amazing for us because it's going to allow us to expand our research.
Good evening. I am Starlette Sinclair. I am an assistant professor of psychology at Florida Gulf Coast University, which is down in the Fort Myers, Southwest Florida area. I guess I'm kind of the statistician of the group. So I tried very hard not to put a whole bunch of numbers in this presentation or super crazy graphs. So I practice restraint. I'm very excited to be speaking with all of you. For those of you who are able to join, but also for those of you who are watching this recording. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, like Dr. Walker said, to expand our research and beyond the ivory tower, beyond academia. So grateful and thankful to be here. So thank you for having us.
All right, so before we get started with our presentation, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our Imposter Phenomenon Research Collaborative. So we are the founding members of an Imposter Phenomenon Research Collaborative. So the IPRC, as we like to call it, is composed of like-minded individuals, but we are interdisciplinary in our approach. So our vision is to add legitimacy to the lived experience of imposter phenomenon. So we basically want people to know that it's real, it does occur. And we also want to empower ourselves and others to move beyond IP to become better versions of ourselves, whatever that may look like for you. And again, we want to promote interdisciplinary collaboration and approaches. So again, this opportunity is a great step in that direction. I'd like to tell you also a little bit about how we were formed. So as Lilia and I mentioned, we're both part of pharmacy schools. We have a listserv for pharmacy faculty, and someone had posted, I believe it was an article about imposter phenomenon. And I was certainly intrigued because I felt like I suffered from imposter phenomenon, and I do. And I put out a message on that listserv asking for collaborators to explore this topic in pharmacy faculty. And Lilia responded to that, and she invited me to a meeting with Doretha and Star, basically because they had already been doing some imposter phenomenon research focused on students. So after that meeting, we decided to collaborate further, and we joined forces, and then we got others involved in that process as well. So here we are today, and we're excited again to be presenting our research to you. So in terms of our learning objectives for today, so we will begin by defining imposter phenomenon, and we'll discuss how it affects achievement, educational achievement, advancement, career development. And then we'll also identify how imposter phenomenon correlates to anxiety, grit, resilience, coping, burnout, as well as job satisfaction. And then we'll discuss strategies that we believe can be helpful in mitigating IP. So I will turn it over to Sinclair, who will Star. I don't know why I keep wanting to call you Sinclair Star, because you have two first names, but Star, I'm turning it over to you to talk to present the first polling question. It's not like we just met, so I don't know why I'm calling her Sinclair tonight, but it's okay.
I don't know what's going on.
So, on your screen, you can see that there is a QR code that you can scan, or if you go to www.menti.com and use the code that's there, you can put in your answer for, do you experience imposter phenomenon? And your answer choices are yes, no, and not sure. I am live and collecting your answers, and I'll be happy to share with you in about 60 seconds to give everyone an opportunity to answer sort of where the room stands, where people feel like they are.
Interactive. I like this.
We can't let you fall asleep.
We're all teachers, so it kind of makes sense, right? We're all like, here's learning objectives and
Right.
activities.
And also gives you an opportunity to define that within yourself. Like, what do you know already?
Right.
Is there a quiz after?
Yes.
Does the other
But you
professor in
all
the
get
room?
an A.
Negative. We want you to like us.
All right, so I'm gonna on my end, like I said, I've got the Mentimeter up, so I can let you all know, and you all just gonna have to trust me that I'm not lying. So
You
so
can
as
share
of
your
right
screen if
now,
you like, Star.
83%, there's an 83% of you have said yes, and 17% have said not sure. Please note, no one chose no. So
Wow.
there we go.
Okay, all right.
I didn't see it.
All right, so I'm going to turn it
Yes.
over. I guess up next is going to be Doretha, who's going to talk to you about. Oh, is it me?
That's
It's you.
Still
It's
me.
you.
Kidding. It's me. All right. So here's where I tell you about imposter phenomenon. My bad. So some of you are like, imposter phenomenon. Wait, I thought it was called imposter syndrome. Never fear. You are correct. So sort of out in general, discussion or use of or this idea, it is referred to as imposter syndrome. So the reason why we take it upon ourselves to be very clear about the reason why it should be called imposter phenomenon and not syndrome is actually two reasons. First of all, because the woman who actually defined this concept, Pauline Clamps, called it imposter phenomenon. So she's the OG. So this is what she called it. The second, I think, more practical reason is that the term, as you all know in research, terms have very specific meanings. And so syndrome, for example, has a very specific meaning in the medical field, right? It means it's something that's a diagnosable diagnosis, and imposter phenomenon is not a diagnosis that you can get. So for example, it's not in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that healthcare practitioners and psychologists and psychiatrists use to classify disorders. So this is why it's more appropriate to refer to it as an imposter phenomenon. It's something you experience, less so than something you're diagnosed with. So with that said, though, your ideas of what imposter syndrome is, just map that onto IP. That's what it is. And it's very much this idea that it encompasses a very real form of self-doubt. And it does impact mental health as well as achievement. And there's plenty of research out there to show that. It is characterized by this internal experience of feeling like a phony, right? Feeling like a fake, particularly when it comes to intellectual pursuits. And it also additionally is characterized by a struggle within the individual to actually internalize and accept their successes. And so we're going to talk sort of more about how this all comes together in our research, but you can notice here on the left kind of this imposter phenomenon cycle that we sort of see happen. So essentially what you have is, it's important to note that IP is something that strikes high achieving people, right? This is not people who don't know what they're doing, but that because of their high achieving and they want to do well, and that's coupled with this anxiety and this self-doubt, what happens is when they are asked or tasked with a piece of work or a project, that anxiety, that self-doubt, and that worry can force them into sort of one of two responses. Either they go into full over preparation mode, or they may go into procrastination avoidance mode to a point. And remember, these are people who are achievers, right? So eventually they're going to get the work done. Right, they're going to accomplish the project or see it through to the end. And so there is this feeling of relief, like, oh, I got it done. However, in the face of receiving praise, accolades, whatever it is, for that work, they will ignore or push away any kind of positive feedback, right? This is that whole struggling to internalize their success, because in their mind, they're like, oh, well, they didn't know that, basically I took forever to get started on this project, or I put so much time into it because I know that, if I didn't, I'm not good enough, right? So I have to like overcompensate almost. And so there's that feeds into these feelings of feeling like a fake and having that self-doubt, having anxiety. It's related to depression. But here's the thing, because we're talking about individuals who are achievers, the people outside of them, right, seeing them as being capable, are going to approach them again, right, with more work and more tasks, because they're like, oh, this person knows how to do it. And so it's very much this internal struggle, because everyone outside of you, everyone outside of these individuals is like, they know what they're doing. They are fully competent, but it's the individual that's struggling with these feelings of feeling, like they're going to be outed. And another thing we want to note is that for the research, and when we get to talking about the results, we did use the Clance. Like I said, she's the OG imposter phenomenon researcher. And so for her scale that we used for our data collection, scores above a 60. So any scores that are beyond a 60 indicate a risk for negative outcomes that are directly associated with imposter phenomenon. And we'll talk about some of those negative outcomes in this talk later on as well. All right. So now I will turn it over to my colleague, Doretha Walker, who will now talk to you about people who are at risk.
And you will have the opportunity to take the Clance survey. It's 21 questions. It's really quick, but you'll have an opportunity to take that. So now that we know what IP is, who's most at risk, and Star alluded to it. And if you look at this list, everybody here is achievement oriented. Well, at least I would hope to think so. And so you're looking at this, you're like, okay, but what does all that mean? So it's high achievers who are unable to internalize and accept their success. They attribute their accomplishments to luck. It's like, oh, I was just lucky. You get promoted. Well, I was just lucky. I remember I got promoted once and I was like, well, there were only 2 people. I mean, it's like, I had a 50% chance. I mean, never mind that, I'm heavily degreed, have all this stuff, but it was like, no, I was just kind of lucky. It's more common among people who are embarking on a new endeavor. So it's like that first year college student, your first year into grad school, your first day on a new job, your first day after you get promoted, because then you're stepping into this place. And again, you're saying, well, it really wasn't. It wasn't because I'm good enough. It's because of all these other factors. Superstition, like if I wear, I had like these shoes. If I wore these shoes, it's like good things always happen when I wore red shoes. And then the one day I didn't wear red shoes, and I was like, see, I knew it was my red shoes. And intellectually, it doesn't really make sense, but it made a lot of sense to me. They say it's only weird if it doesn't work. When you have your superstitions, even when you're talking about like the outcome of a sports game, you always do these things, and it's not weird if it works, but it's weird if it doesn't work. And originally this was thought to be women, but we're finding out that men also have it, but there's just more systems in place for men to help them overcome it. And we'll talk about those later. And it also occurs if you're different from the majority of your peers. So when you are the one and you're walking into the room and no one else looks like you, then there's that time when you're like, okay, yeah, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. If you're the youngest, that happens a lot when younger people walk into the room because everybody appears to be older. Next slide, Miriam.
All right, and I believe this one is
That is
me.
you.
So, so as we learned from Star, as she shared earlier, IP is characterized by self-doubt, feeling intellectually phony, and having the struggle with internalizing and accepting success. So the reality is that when IP was first defined or described in the 1970s, it did not necessarily take into consideration the role that things like systemic racism, classism, xenophobia, and other biases may play in promoting feelings of self-doubt, especially in women and minorities. For example, it might be especially true. So as Doretha mentioned, if someone walks into a room where they're the only one, the only female, the only male, the only African-American, the only able-bodied person, or whatever the situation is, that's when they tend to feel some of this feeling of self-doubt the most. But in some cases, when individuals are the only one, and this does happen a lot in the case of women and minorities, they may experience something called discriminatory gaslighting. So discriminatory gaslighting is when a dominant social group, and a dominant social group, there's lots of different things. So sometimes that's the white race, sometimes it's being able-bodied, sometimes it's being, Christian religion, it might be having a certain set of experiences. So whatever that dominant social group is, they may cause an individual or a group to question their perception of reality, their memory, or their identity. So they may use psychological tricks to maintain power and privilege by sowing these feelings of self-doubt and dependence in the minoritized groups. So you might be wondering, well, what does that actually look like? So imagine a student who perhaps is, an African-American student who is at an Ivy League school. That student actually had really strong SAT scores, high grades in all of their AP courses, lots of leadership experience, national awards, fantastic recommendations, but they might be accused by a white classmate of getting into the Ivy League school because of their race. So certainly in that situation, that person over time, if they have these experiences continuously, may begin to have these feelings of self-doubt. So even if they did have imposter phenomenon, we have to ask the question, is it really just imposter phenomenon, or is the environment really contributing to the self-doubt? Is there some discriminatory gaslighting occurring in that particular case? So there's also situations where gender biases may play a role in feelings of imposter phenomenon. For example, there is maternal bias, which is the assumption that women who are mothers are less committed to their careers or less competent. There's also performance bias, where there tends to be a tendency to underestimate a woman's performance, but overestimate a man's performance. So certainly this can contribute to self-doubt as well. So the challenge that we have with IP sometimes is it puts the blame on the individual, right? The individual has to fix something, but in essence, it's really the environment at times that may need to change. So institutions should strive to create environments that actually foster inclusion, that values diverse racial, ethnic, and gender identities. So we do need to fix the environment at times and not put so much of the pressure on the individual to fix themselves. So I'll turn over to Dr. Walker, who'll talk about the, actually, I'm gonna turn over to myself because we have a reflection question next. So just wanted you guys to think about this question. So what experiences have you had where you question if it was imposter phenomenon? Were you having this self-doubt going on, or was it something else at play? So racism, sexism, or some other type of ism. And someone can feel free to share, or you can put something in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable with is fine. And you all don't have to share.
I can share. This is Anna. I feel like when being talked to, I urge when I have a drink in my hand to talk back. So I'll make a comment. So I feel like I've had imposter phenomenon like a ton. It honestly depends on which group I'm in. Like I feel like I've always been somewhat of a social butterfly. And I love learning, I love meeting people, all that kind of stuff. But I'm a lesbian, and I grew up in the South, and so I feel like I pretty much had IP up until even after I came out, because I'm always trying to be whoever the people around me are best with, while also being myself. So I feel like that's a difficult one. Also being in the food industry, in the side that we're in the manufactured food industry somewhat, when you're around chefs that have their own restaurants, you know, sometimes you don't want to be looked at as a sellout. And then when I'm around scientists, I also have a science background and I have a master's in science, but then I'm like, okay, you know, so it's kind of a struggle. I feel like as I've gotten older, it's been easier as I've been like more self-confidence, just been mindful and kind of understanding my path, but it's kind of a tough one. I feel like that's pretty much what I was for the first like 25 years of my life.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anna. And I think many of us can relate to that. So certainly the situation that you're in and the people that you're around may impact those feelings of IP in more ways than one.
I think for me, you know, being both a military veteran and a former person from food service, I guess I always struggled with the title chef just because I never owned my own restaurant or managed my own line or anything like that. But I guess I honestly have pursued a bunch of experiences and titles and things like that because I wanted to feel like I deserved to be in a room or at a table. You know, I constantly feel like I have to collect all of these capabilities and skills and experiences so that someday, if I can build up enough inertia and just blast through that door and get to the table, I'm not exactly sure what I expect to do once I hit that table. I know that I plan to put a door jam in there so that others don't have the same door to go running through. And at the same time, yeah, I feel like I'm earning constantly and I don't feel like I've ever earned enough. So I don't feel like I've gotten the right to be in the room. So I just kind of create my own room and my own table. You know, like choosing to host a podcast, choosing to host these events is because we haven't seen it done for us or we haven't been invited to the infrastructure that's there. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to wait for y'all to get your act together. I'm just going to make it myself and we're just going to replace whatever is there, I guess, is my answer to it. But I don't know if that's the right or best path for everyone.
There is none.
Yeah.
You gotta
right.
do what works.
That's
Yeah.
right.
You have to do what
I think
works.
it's important. I mean, what I'm hearing from both Anna and you, Kimberly, is this idea that feeling like you have to earn and do more and work harder and push more, and always thinking of ways to do more because it is this sort of, I've got to show you that I'm supposed to be here. And I think part of overcoming or mitigating IP is to take that individual affirmation and know that you are where you're supposed to be and that you do deserve to be there and to accept that. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do, especially when you're looking around the room and maybe, like you said, you know, things may have come easier for, or seem to have come easier for other people, or they seem to know more, or they seem to be in places of privilege that you don't have, but understanding that you are where you're supposed to be. And that can be a sort of hard to tell ourselves, right?
Ken, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to add too, because like I'm one of the new members to the group, and the one thing that drew me to this at RCA was, you know, Kimberly saying, "Hey, I also run this Hustlers, you know, under 40," and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm under 40." And you know, one of the biggest things that I struggle with is age. You know, I look a little older because I have no hair on top, but that is earned. This is earned baldness here. But you know, I'm only 33. But I always felt like I was sitting in a room with people that were 15, 20 years older than me. And even the company that I'm at, there's people that have worked for this company longer than I've been alive. But I sit at that table with decision makers and with people that, you know, have years and years and years of experience, but I keep getting brought in. So I always feel like I'm like part of the party, but I'm not sure if I'm fully part of the party yet. And there's always this guessing, but that's been my whole life. Having started culinary school when I was only 17, I was early in my class. I was early to graduate. I've always been early. and it's definitely a struggle with that. And then, and like Anna, I'm a gay man, so that's also a double thing. And I came from food service sales, which in most parts of the country, my experience is having worked for US Foods, that was very much a good old boys club type thing. And there was it was a male dominated industry. I think it's seen a lot more balance. There's like WFF and there's a lot of women influence, which I think is super exciting. But the food service sales part was always like good old boys club. You know, we had all the guys that, you know, hung out. And I don't play golf, I don't play sports. So I'm always kind of like navigating and trying to figure out where I belong. And this is really important to me as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I know, like things like that. So it's just really cool to just sitting in gratitude to hear other people's stories. And I think a lot of us are feeling very in similar ways and have very similar experiences. So it just helps me feel not alone.
And I don't want to take over this call, but I have something I was thinking about, and like the environment, right? Thanks, Kimberly. Like, I feel like all thanks to my current environment is kind of where I've gotten myself to, and I feel comfortable with this group. I feel comfortable in the Research Chefs Hustler group and RCA overall. Like, I feel it's my home because I haven't really had the whole IP thing was like very short lived. Like, I felt comfortable. I feel so, you know, what part of it is I think a lot of it's your environment, but also kind of like, does it make me like a weak individual that I'm like, am I kind of in my company? I love my company for many reasons, but I feel at home because I feel accepted and I feel like I can, you know, be encouraged for who I am. So is that in a sense stopping me from going to another company and challenge myself? Like, so does that, I guess weak isn't entirely the wrong word, but you know, like it's kind of nice to feel less IP, right? Like, so where is that area to where you know, I don't know. It's kind of making me think in the past 5 minutes too.
Well, we hope to make you think more. So don't hate
Right.
us. Don't hate us.
Because the next one is going to be the implications of IP on career development and advancement. So that was a great segue. Thank you. So, well, you know, when you think about it, you know, what she said about, you know, I'd like not feeling IP, so maybe I should stay here. And there's nothing wrong with being, you know, staying where you, you know, blooming where you're planted. But just think about high career insecurity. So when you have high career insecurity, you make ill-fitting career choices and you experience burnout. And we'll talk about burnout more later. It instills self-doubt and low self-esteem. You reject the praise, you downplay your achievements, and you allow others to take the acclaim. You know, when you're sitting there and you have this great, I've been in a meeting and I said something and nobody listened, and this guy said the same exact thing, and everyone's like, oh, that's a really great idea. And I didn't even say, but I said it first. I just said, you know, doesn't matter, it's for the good of the company. But then I started, you know, you start thinking, well, when you do that, then you are like reinforcing all those feelings that you have that you're not good enough because somebody else did the same exact thing and I didn't stand up for myself. So, you know, there is that too, that, you know, you keep perpetuating this cycle. It limits your willingness to advocate for yourself. Like in that instance, I didn't advocate for myself, but on a greater scheme, you're not advocating yourself for that promotion. You deserve that promotion. You deserve to be called chef. Or if somebody calls you a culinary person and you're like, okay, so I guess I am a culinary person. The other day, somebody like said, oh, I just thought you were a hip hop chick. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And then when they found out that I had a PhD, they're like, oh, I just thought you were a hip hop chick. And I was like, I don't know really what that means. But, you know, but not allowing that to even penetrate me, saying, oh, wow, now, you know, I look like a hip hop chick. So now do I have to go, you know, start doubting myself? I was like, yeah, whatever, you know, you're not even worth my time. But I know that later, you know, earlier on in my life, I probably would have like went home and like cried, like, what is a hip hop chick, and tried to figure out what it is when it really has no bearing on my life. It impedes career growth because sufferers may not demand or even expect a promotion, or may simply not push themselves forward at work. It stifles your leadership and your management. Sufferers will feel vulnerable and fear being exposed, which makes making tough, unpopular decisions harder and showing strong leadership less likely. It restricts your innovation and your risk taking. You feel failure and inhibits creativity and inventiveness. You look at a job description and you'll discount your experiences. You say, okay, I don't have 100% of what they're asking for, so I'm not going to apply at all. And there's research that shows that women will only apply if they have 80 to 85%, and men have 60 or below, and they'll apply for the job. And also, you limit the positions that you apply for. You're not doing those stretch positions. You're not seeing yourself as levels higher than you are. It affects your mental health because it creates stress, anxiety, and feelings of isolation. And it's related to all the indicators of employee relevant subjective outcomes. It correlates. Oh, next slide, Miriam. So it correlates negatively with career satisfaction. It correlates negatively with job satisfaction. It correlates positively with emotional exhaustion, and positively with lacking of coping mechanisms. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lilia.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our project objectives, right? So our two main project objectives what is the prevalence of imposter phenomenon in faculty and staff? That is actually what our current sample is made up of, but we do have intention of expanding to industry. Our second one is, how does IP relate to anxiety, grit, resilience coping, burnout, and job satisfaction? Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about anxiety. So everyone just throws these terms around, right? So when we think about anxiety, we know it's an emotion characterized by apprehension and somatic symptoms of tension in which an individual anticipates impending danger, catastrophe, or misfortune. When you think about anxiety, the body often mobilizes itself to meet the perceived threat. A person with anxiety has muscles that become tense, their breathing becomes faster, and the heart beats more rapidly. Now, anxiety may be distinguished from fear both conceptually and physiologically, although, as you know, both terms have been used interchangeably. Anxiety is considered future-oriented, okay? It is a long-acting response broadly focused on a diffuse threat, whereas fear is appropriate, it is present-oriented, and short-lived response to a clearly identifiable and specific threat. We used the Beck Anxiety Inventory to measure anxiety in our survey. So we actually embedded this instrument. It uses a Likert scale 1 to 3 with raw scores from 0 to 63. Next slide, please. When we think about grit, we all know someone that's gritty, okay? So that's one of those terms that when you know someone that has grit, you know exactly what that means, right? So when we think about what grit means, grit, according to Duckworth, Peterson, and Matthews and Kelly, introduced the construct defined as a trait-level perseverance and passion for long-term goals. It is grit predicted achievement in challenging domains over and beyond the measures of talent. It is distinct from traditional measures of the Big Five conscientiousness, with its emphasis on stamina. In particular, grit entails the capacity to sustain both effort and interest in projects that take months and even longer to complete. Individuals with high grit do not swerve from their goals, even in the absence of positive feedback. Now let's talk about resilience. Resilience is the ability of an individual to rebound and positively adapt from significant stressors. Okay? When we think about resilience, some individuals thrive after navigating challenges successfully because they focus on the positive aspects of the experiences. You know, when you talk about individuals who are always finding the positive in a negative situation, okay, those are individuals with more resilience. Resilience coping is adaptive. It is a protective process, and it is associated with psychological and physiological outcomes. Next slide, please. Now, burnout, I think we've all experienced burnout at some point in our lives. Actually, burnout is characterized by 3 dimensions: emotional exhaustion, which is feelings of being depleted in one's emotional resources. It represents the basic individual stress component of the syndrome. When we think about depersonalization, now what does that actually mean? Think about when you get very negative, when you get cynical or excessively detached responses to other people. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about depersonalization. And that represents the interpersonal component of burnout. Now, when we talk about the reduced personal accomplishment, specifically, the reduced personal accomplishments is your own feelings of decline in one's own competence and productivity, right? It is to one's lower sense of efficacy. And I know that we've all gone through that professionally, where we just feel that we're more efficacious at some times versus others. In our survey, we had 2 different instruments specifically for faculty and students. There were 22 self-reported questions. The students had 16, both on Likert scales. And essentially what's important to note is the higher the score, the greater the burnout, okay? Next slide, please. When we think about job satisfaction, the way we evaluated this was we used the overall job satisfaction questionnaire. We know that job satisfaction is the feelings of fulfillment and enjoyment that a person gets from their job. In this actual 5-question survey that was embedded in our overall questionnaire, it was a 7-point Likert scale, from 1 being terrible, 7 to delightful, and it was very brief, just 5 questions. Next slide, please. Now, I have just very briefly gone over all these instruments, right? We had the CLANCE, which Dr. Sinclair has described as being the instrument that you use to measure imposter phenomenon, the Beck, GRIT, the student burnout, faculty burnout. All these instruments were put together in one survey instrument. So you can imagine that when we did our cross-sectional study and we administered this to a sample of convenience, it took a long time, okay? Between 15 to 30 minutes. How many of you have had to sit and do a survey for 15 to 30 minutes? It's a long time. See, Ken, I see you laughing. I see Kim laughing like, oh my God, 15 to 30 minutes. I know. And then not only that, but like we're digging, okay? Like we're digging and we're asking you things that are like emotionally taxing, right? Regardless, you know, we've had tremendous response of over 110 institutions. We ran some t-tests and ANOVA and some regression. And in order to make sure that we weren't being jinxy, we ran our whole IRB through the South University IRB process. And now, dun, dun, dun.
Yes. So now take out your phones. Here's the QR code. We want you to take the imposter phenomenon scale.
This one won't take 15 to 30 minutes. This one's just 20 questions.
Yeah.
And I went ahead, if anyone is having trouble with the QR code, I actually put the link in the chat because I don't know what devices everyone's on. So you can take the go to the chat and get the link, and it'll take you to the test as well.
So while you're taking, I'm just going to give you the parameters. If you score 40 or less, you have few imposter characteristics. If you score between 41 and 60, you have moderate experiences. If you score between 61 and 80, you have frequent imposter feelings. And if you score higher than 80, you have intense IP. You're experiencing intense IP. So when I did this a few weeks ago, I had one out of 100 people, I had one woman had 40, one woman had 44, and everybody else was 70 or above. So if you score high, do not feel that you are by yourself. And if you'd like, you can share your score in the chat. Or you can say it out loud.
And Miriam, if you want to go to the next slide, that one has the poll where people can indicate if based off the scale they're experiencing IP. So remember that's according to Clance, any scores above a 60 puts you into the frequent towards intense ranges. So that would be a yes. If you're 41 to 60, it's moderate, so that would also still be a yes. So basically, if your score is 40 or lower,
40 or above, it's a yes.
Right. 41 and up, yes. 40 or lower, no. And Kimberly, these, I know that we're recording, so these QR codes, not the one for the poll, but for to take the activity is actually going to be live. It will remain up. So if people who are watching it back want to go ahead and take the Clance, they'll be able to scan the code when it's up on the screen in the recording and go to the test as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. To be honest, I'm struggling with some of the answers.
Don't overthink it.
That's normal.
Okay, I'll share because I'm done here. I got 58%.
Okay.
Okay.
But what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump off because as you guys know, I'm going to go get in my car and sit in LA traffic on the way home. So I'll connect from the car here in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Hey,
Drive
drive
safe.
We'll see you in a
safely.
bit.
Yeah,
Drive safely.
will do.
Okay, I got a 70. A perfect C. Seems to be my favorite number in grad school stuff. It's like, okay, I'm still passing for the next class, but Lordy, if I'd had more time.
I got 74.
Welcome to the club. That's all I have to say.
Yes, welcome.
Welcome. Welcome.
Yes.
You're in good company.
Yes, you are.
Yep. So if you'd like to go ahead,
We need a hustler IP subgroup.
I wonder.
a support group.
That'd be awesome.
All right. So if you have a moment, if you would like to go back to our Menti, it's the same code. You should see the same question up, the polling question, and you can certainly answer yes or no. And then I will let you know, what the group data says on my end.
I got 77. Oh.
Mm.
Well, thank goodness I don't have the highest score. I'm right there.
Well, it's one of those tests where you don't want to be the highest. Like,
oh.
Well, like we said, this is a brave space, and also
Yes,
you're not
yes.
alone. And I just want to let you all know, based off of so far the polling data, we're at 100% yes.
Okay.
So far. So yay, we're all here.
We're all in this together.
All right, let's go ahead and move forward, or else we're going to keep these poor people here, because Lord knows we can talk. Like, we make a living.
Yeah, we can.
So, like,
So as Lilia mentioned, that we did, our survey was in academia. And so we had a total of 1,147 respondents, and it was 110 institutions.
Can I ask a
sure.
quick question?
Yeah.
All right. Is there any community college represented in the faculty? Community college faculty?
No, and that's partly because most of the faculty data are from pharmacy faculty. That's who we had initially reached out to. Like we said, we were convenience sampling, so that's who we have so far. But this is an ongoing study for sure, where we hope to diversify in a number of different ways. And one of those ways is to include both students and faculty from wide ranges of kinds of schools and different levels. So community colleges would certainly be, we will be seeking out participation from there as well.
So if you have
yeah, I was gonna say, if you know someone that we can contact, we would love the information. So the median age was 44.6 for the faculty and 20.2 for the students. Interesting of note to me was 71% of the people that took the survey on the faculty side was female, and on the students it was also female. Race, 87% white, 84 on the student side. Relationship status for the faculty was 85%, 39% on the students, and that's expected because a lot of the students were undergraduate students. They all came from Florida Gulf Coast University, thanks to STARS, heavily influenced over there. The military was less than 1% on the faculty, and then 1%. And then born outside the United States was 10% on the faculty and 8% on the students. So I'll turn it over to Miriam.
All right, so you may recall that scores above 60, those that fall into the frequent and intense category are actually linked to negative outcomes. So in our sample of more than 1,100 faculty and students from across the academy, 57% of our respondents experience frequent and intense IP. So definitely a large number experienced the frequent and intense category, but we still had basically 100% of people who experienced some level of IP. And when we look at the results in terms of sex, ethnicity, and race, we found that IP was higher in female participants, but this was largely driven by the student data. When we looked at the faculty data alone, we did not see any differences between males and females. There was also no statistically significant difference between races and no statistically significant difference between Hispanic, Latinx, and non-Hispanic Latinx participants. And this pattern actually stayed consistent even when we stratified the groups by faculty and student categories. So I'll turn it over to Star to talk about the relationships between IP and some of these other parameters.
Right, so this is where we kind of get into why is it important to look at IP as, one of these predictors of and relationships with important aspects of personal well-being as well as career success and academic success. So higher IP scores, so the higher the IP scores were significantly associated with the following. So people who were higher in IP experienced or reported more anxiety, more frequent burnout, more intense burnout experiences, more disengagement, and as well as more exhaustion. And then lower IP, so lower scores on imposter phenomenon, were associated with people who were more gritty, who exhibited more effective coping, so more resilience coping strategies, as well as higher job satisfaction. And of course, this is specific, the job satisfaction assessment was done within our faculty. So this idea that IP is not a great thing to have or experience, and that it is correlated with these these outcomes that are problematic as well. And then it's important to note, I put a note to myself that for the job satisfaction scale, as you may recall, it went from 1, which is like horrible and terrible, and to 7, which is delightful. Overall, the average was around 5. So this is about 1 point above, indifferent. So the middle of the scale was indifference. And so the idea then is that faculty, not indifferent, but they're kind of moving towards like they like or satisfied on average with their jobs, but certainly not a ringing endorsement for being in the academy for sure. Next slide, please. That's you, Miriam. You're going to talk about strategy.
All right, so I will talk about strategy, but I won't talk about each of these in detail, but I will highlight some. So now that we understand that IP is correlated to a number of different psychological factors, let's talk a little bit about these strategies that might mitigate it. So I will point out that there's actually not a lot of evidence-based data showing like what works without a shadow of a doubt, but there are strategies that are mentioned in the literature focus on both individual as well as institutional strategies. So one of the strategies that's really important is mentoring. So you might remember that we mentioned earlier on that men and women actually experience IP to the same extent. And we can actually see it in our mini sample today. Everyone had IP. So we have both men and women present. So men and women experience it to the same extent, but men sometimes tend to find more encouragement and support to pursue opportunities than women do. And sometimes it just might be because individuals, it's sort of the in terms of bias, the likability, not likability, but I'm using the wrong term, but people basically are biased towards people who are like them. So if you're in an industry where, for example, it's predominantly men, so like you're saying with the chefs, then perhaps those individuals might be mentored more by someone who is also a male, and maybe the women might not, and they might experience that IP more. So I hope that makes sense. So sharing your feelings of IP with a mentor can actually help you realize that the feelings are somewhat normal, but that they're also irrational, that you are, a high achiever, you are qualified, and hopefully they can help you to see that. So one of the other strategies is documenting. So documenting means looking at ways to reflect on those successes. So for some people, it might be looking at your resume or CV periodically, just to see what it is exactly that you have accomplished, because you've definitely accomplished a lot. It might also mean keeping a journal of those accomplishments and going back and reflecting on those. So the documenting is very important as well. Recognizing your expertise. So sometimes that may mean mentoring those who are less experienced than you are. So sometimes when you are able to when you're able to mentor a less experienced person, that helps you to realize how far you've come. So we talked about how grit is inversely correlated with IP. So the higher your grit, the lower the IP. So improving grit is another strategy for coping with IP. So the way that you improve grit is basically to identify a skill that needs improvement and to continue practicing it with full effort, seeking feedback until you get better and you master it. So those are some of the individual strategies. So as far as institution, we talked about how sometimes the environment needs to be fixed. So institutions, places of employment should take IP seriously. They could certainly offer educational opportunities to discuss IP. So like your organization is doing now, making counseling available to individuals, providing both challenge and support, meaning that you encourage people to do more than they might normally do and support them in those efforts. And then also fostering an environment of inclusion. So again, making sure that it's an environment that welcomes differences in all aspects of the word. So that was my synopsis of strategy. So I'll turn it over to Star, who will talk about conclusions.
All righty, so we're going to conclude because, as you all know, we're talkers, and we know that y'all need to go home and probably do other cool stuff too. So here's to kind of just wrap up or to conclude what we've talked about this evening with you. So first of all, just recapping our data. So far, we found that imposter phenomenon is significantly correlated with a number of factors, whether they're motivational or psychological, that are important for not only our personal well-being, but also career success and achievement. So understanding the impact of these non-cognitive traits in professionals is a really important component of professional development as well as support, because that's what it really comes down to, is that support. We didn't find any significant difference when we looked at IP when we compared race and ethnicity. Now, I will kind of caution why we're not going to come out and say, well, there aren't any, because there is, evidence in the literature that we should be sort of seeing these differences. And part of that, if you think back to when we described our study and our sample, is it is a large percent white and a large percent female. And also not necessarily very race or ethnically diverse, or as diverse as we would like it to be. And that's something we're certainly working on, working forward with targeted recruitment to get more representation of groups so that we can, do those analyses confidently and make confident conclusions about what we're seeing. We did see some differences by sex. So where the females outscored were higher on IP than the males. But like we said, when we stratified that, when we looked at just our faculty versus just our students, that difference really was mostly driven by the student data as well. But that's also, like I said, the faculty data was mostly pharmacy faculty, and the student data is definitely a lot more diverse as far as major and discipline. And that's also something that we're looking to expand and address in continued recruitment for this study. We also saw that there's the negative or psychological impacts of IP is actually higher in women when we looked at our data. So for example, we saw higher instances of anxiety and burnout with those individuals who have higher IP, and we didn't show it in these data because, like I said, I was restraint. But when we separated it out and looked at the relationships and women versus men, we did see a much stronger relationship between IP and anxiety and burnout for our the females in our sample. It's still there for men, but it's much more pronounced in women. Women also had higher grit scores. So overall, females were grittier. And this may be an indicator of, especially in our faculty, their success that's despite the presence of challenges. So despite maybe, and we're in this cross-sectional study, so perhaps even though we see sort of higher IP in female students, perhaps the people who make it to being, faculty or in their career, those women are women who were able to work through it, to work past it, to mitigate it in some way, or it could be that those women who were higher as students don't make it. And so that's another aspect of our research that we want to look at, is sort of this longitudinal trajectory to see if we can figure out sort of what's happening here. And then so further studies, like Miriam mentioned, there's a lot of there's suggestions out there, but there's a huge gap in the literature as far as like people actually testing and showing up evidence-based strategies. Like, so we tried this intervention and we showed that we were able to mitigate or reduce IP. And that's another aspect of our research and future research that we would like to do, certainly future studies that are needed. And I'll turn it over to Doretha for our final reflection.
So after everything that you learned today, how does this reconcile with your own thoughts about the imposter phenomenon? I mean, did you learn anything new? Did you know this already?
I learned a lot. But I wanted to give other folks a chance to chat first. Anyone else want to share?
I feel like I learned a lot. I took Kimberly's assessment thing, and I'm not sure if this was obviously related to that, but I hadn't thought about this in a long time until then. And so I feel like I learned so much, and especially like the correlation between so many different factors, even obviously the ones that you mentioned, but I also just think about just other stuff too, based on your environment and whatnot. So it's super interesting. It just opens up so many questions and further reflection. So really appreciate it. This was awesome. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.
I think Adam was going to jump in.
Yeah, as I was one of the sures sort of in the beginning of this, because didn't really know definition properly. To go from that to a high score, I didn't really expect that, but it is. I said this to Kevin. It's kind of cathartic in a way to know that we're at least 100% are in the activity category. And yeah, just, some of those questions about luck and dismissing things with luck, or, oh, I knew a person, that kind of a thing. It's like those ones really cut in, because there's that part of me, it's like, no, luck, that's silly. Nothing's luck. I worked relationships and made things happen, but when I do really think about it, I definitely dismiss it as just being luck. And I know that it's wrong, but it's a hard thing to overcome, I guess. So yeah, no, this was incredibly enlightening. Thank you.
Well,
Welcome.
we're thankful, so thankful for the opportunity, and thank you for the invitation. And we're so happy about your relationship with Doretha, and it's just been great. Thank you.
Yeah, and they
Well,
offered to do our survey, so we're in the process of modifying it so that that it fits you, because right now it's just geared toward academia. So there were some things on it that we want to modify, but this is good for us, because in the beginning I wanted to talk about, focus on industry, and then we used our sample of convenience, and convenient for us was academia, and now we can like branch out.
Awesome.
Sorry, would anyone else like to share? I wasn't sure if we
Yeah,
and I appreciate all the information. It was really nice to be able to, and I apologize because I came a little bit later, but be able to hear some of the information and some of the things that people share, and even taking the quiz and the questionnaire and seeing everything in writing. Sometimes you don't really realize that you're doing some of these things when you're really doing it, and it's tough, right? Especially when you start seeing it in writing and you're like, yes, I'm doing that, and yes, I'm doing that. It's like, oh gosh, yes, I'm doing that. It's starting to recognize it and be able to actually put words into what you're doing and what you're feeling, that I think is something that I have to take up as a challenge myself, to be able to grow and realize what I'm doing, because sometimes you just do it unintentionally, and it's just crazy and it's baffling. And again, I appreciate you guys providing that information, because it's nice to finally put thoughts or the words into like the way that you're feeling.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. So that's something that we hear, and something that is part of that. How do you mitigate it? That's why we say it's hidden, because some people don't have the language for it, right? They're like, I know I experience and do these things, but I don't know what this is called. So that's why it's so important for us to, even with our research, but even beyond that, just to be out here educating people and having people like, look, it doesn't have to be hidden, right? You can stare it in the face and call it what it is. And that's part of a mitigation strategy too. So when you start to have that negative self-talk, or you start to find yourself, oh yeah, I made it look easy, but little do they know it wasn't lucky. It made it look easy because you are competent and you are capable, and you've worked hard to have that competence and that capability. And so being able to, maybe combat those thoughts that may rise up. And I think we've all, like the squad, we call ourselves, have had those moments where we're like about to do a presentation or about to talk about our work, where we're like, sometimes it creeps up. And I've had, like Lilia said it at different points when we're getting ready to present at a conference, and Doretha said it too, and Miriam, and same thing. But that's another aspect too, is having your peers basically, tell you to get out of your own head, like having your peers affirm, like, okay, you know what, that's your IP talking. So now you know what it is. You can tell yourself, that's my IP talking. Let me let me push that away, because I got this. And I think having the language and understanding, naming the thing, right? And, that we talk about, like, fear and all that. So if you're able to name what it is, then it's not so scary anymore, and you're able to better cope and push up against it, right? And push it away. So thank you all for sharing, for sure.
Kevin had his hand up.
Oh, there was a question on that really struck with me. There's obviously a lot about luck and stuff like that, but there was one in particular about not letting anyone know until you've actually achieved something, which is like, as I was reading, I was like, whoever came up with this question was because even with like work or education or career wise, I typically like would not like tell anyone until I passed the hurdle, which is kind of which is kind of interesting.
Right, 'cause you
And
don't want to jinx it, right? Because it's
yeah,
low.
or if
I don't want to jinx
or the disappointment if it doesn't happen, right? Like
Right.
you know, you've already told
Yeah.
someone, and part of the reason why I'm curious, I'm part of faculty equity training academy at the community college that I teach at, and this topic kind of relates to it as you look at so that specific one was focused on finding marginalized population within the departments that we teach at. So it's comprised of 20 faculty. There's 5 white, 5 African American, 5 Asian, and 5 Hispanic origin faculty. That's kind of part of a community of practice that kind of every other week we focus on a specific equity principle in teaching. And as kind of going through the material, it really resonates on not just the faculty, but the student population that we teach at. You know, like a lot of them are first generation college students. And like, do I belong to school, right? Like they're the first one in their family. And that's kind of interesting as you guys talk about, you know, branching out the data set for imposter phenomenon to kind of see how it relates to different subset of, you know, student population, right? And kind of different struggles that they're experiencing throughout their career, and kind of figuring out, you know, what direction that they want to be, or do actually belong to school based on, you know, what they're going through. So I kind of felt the same way. I started teaching when I was 21. So I was the youngest one that was hired in the campus, and kind of being, as you guys talked about earlier, being the youngest and, you know, minority, and kind of having your authority in school and building respect with your colleagues and students. It's kind of interesting journey for it. Yeah.
So I shared in the chat really quickly. They're still called, you know, like I said, imposter syndrome is the typical reference, but I shared in it, and I thought it was, you know, kind of a good way to maybe leave you all with something of visual. So if you download or open the photo, it talks about like types of imposter phenomenon. And so maybe you can see yourself. So in this discussion, I've heard kind of a little bit of everything, people talking about, you know, feeling like they've got to do extra and more and go above and beyond, or feeling like, you know, they have to, I mean, I don't know why I closed it. It's right here. You know, the whole, like, you know, not wanting to tell people, like, because maybe there's that fear of failure. Like, you know, if I aim high and I fail, and they're going to see me, right? The superhero, people who overwork themselves to make up for how inadequate they may feel, the perfectionists, the soloists, like maybe wanting to work alone because you don't want people to figure out that you may not know what you're doing. So I put that in there so you all can kind of check that out, you know, as far as like, these may, you know, and granted, it doesn't say, you know, it's not to say that you're one thing or the other, but maybe at different points through kind of working through your IP experiences, you may have done some of these things, right? Kim has her hand up, I think. Kim Davis.
Yes, she does.
Yes, I just wanted to just share, I think the big thing that I learned was the environment piece, that your institution or your employer has some responsibility, I think, in this whole situation of feeling IP or experiencing it. I think that's really interesting. I'm wondering how many companies are actually identifying this as an issue. Because I think, you know, burnout is definitely an issue that, you know, employers or institutions recognize. But I think it's really interesting to put together that IP is a big factor, or can be a factor, in burnout. And one of the first slides you all showed was like the list of characteristics of people who are high risk. And I thought, oh, wow, I didn't identify with a lot of those. And also, isn't that something a lot of employers, don't they want, you know, high achieving people? Do they want people in minority groups? Don't they want all these things? So they want to attract these kind of candidates, they need to also make changes as well. I think it can't just be on the individual.
It is that
That's my
support
2
piece.
cents there.
Yeah, that support piece is so important. Yes.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
But many companies think that being inclusive means I'm hiring you and then I'm done. I've done my part. And they don't understand that there's that whole belonging piece. This is what you're talking about. The belonging piece that people feel that they, access is not inclusion. You can give me access, but if you're not inviting me to the table, if you're not making sure that I'm comfortable, then that's the piece that goes away. But that's a missing piece in many corporations.
I would say we had an inclusion class. I know I'm driving in the car, I'm just chatting, I'm not watching the presentation, but one of the easiest things it was for me to follow, going through inclusion was, the inclusion part is, being asked to dance versus, or being asked to the dance versus being asked to dance. And that really
Exactly. It's a
struck
good
hard with
one.
me because you can invite anybody to the party, but unless you
Mhm.
actually bring them in and make them part of it, it's not the same. So I like how
Right.
there's that key identifier there that really helps us understand it a little bit better.
And Kevin, if you're willing, we'll be more than happy to send you our packet if you think that your school would want to participate in our survey.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think if you guys send your information, I could reach out to the faculty that's coordinating we call it the FIDA cohort.
Next slide, Miriam.
Oh, is it in
Yeah,
there?
next
Oh.
slide. Yes, right there.
Oh, wow, you guys are ready. Yes,
Yes,
I
we
can
are.
tell you guys are professors. Like the last slide always has the email.
So yes, if
But
you are
yeah, you might be
interested-
able to. I can see if she'll have you guys in one of our. So it's a two-part. So the first, this semester was focused on learning about the equity guiding principles, and next semester we're focused on our practitioner research on our own classes to kind of how to implement equity in the courses that we teach. And I think that's when she would invite guest speakers to talk about different topics. So I think it might be fun for you guys to speak in that fellow faculty as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I put our email in the chat, but also obviously it's here on the slide. So we have a dedicated email for if you're interested in learning more, if you're interested in potentially becoming a collaborator with us on this research, if you're like, wow, this is something that I would really like to get into, or if you're like, hey, I'd like to be in the survey too, count me in.
Yeah.
Please reach out to us and we'll be sure to connect with you and get you, whatever you need. And certainly, any ongoing conversations we are happy to be a part of. And so yeah, I think we hit the question side, Miriam. I think we got the questions, but I know we're.
Oh, see, I do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
But if you have additional questions for us, we're certainly happy to answer them for you all. But just from me, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of my team here, thank you all so very much for the opportunity and the discussion, and also for being vulnerable and brave and and being so open about your experiences and your thoughts. And we're incredibly appreciative of your time this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Hey guys, we appreciate it.
Well, look at those references.
Hey, we got to cite our sources.
Exactly.
When I counted 29.
I love it.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So Kimberly, if you need anything, you can reach out to me. And
Yes, ma'am. I will. We'll definitely have you back for a 2.0. There were folks who really wanted to join, but schedules are what they are. So
yeah, exactly.
So with all of your permissions, I am going to post this on a privately listed YouTube channel. So folks in our group will know about it, but the stuff that was shared in vulnerability and confidence stays with whoever sees this link. So it's our Discord group. Message me separately if you have a concern about that, and we'll edit out those pieces if desired. Next month is Asian American Pacific Islander month, and Chef Kevin is actually going to be our guest speaker. And I'm very excited. I also volunteered to do the AAPI talk for the sales team call. And if I can, acknowledge the massive imposter syndrome I have. And it's like, you have imposter syndrome about your ethnic identity? And it's like, yes, I do. So I'll explain why. I'm adopted. And so the knowledge and understanding of my heritage is limited to what you see and learning how to deal with curly hair. Like none of those things were things that I knew how to deal with as a kid. And so I'm also the only Asian American in the group that would be speaking. And so I'm like, I feel like I should say something. Also, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. Like, do I talk about like celebrity Asian Americans? Do I talk about scientists, which would be the more logical direction to go? I have no idea. So Chef Kevin, I'll be reaching out to you with questions. And also, it's interesting to be identified of having certain attributes or certain strengths and interests, but then to not really actually embody those or identify for yourself, right? Like, so the attributes that I'm attaching to people are completely inaccurate because I haven't even asked them if those are right to who they are. And I thought that was interesting, how my assumptions about the receiver can increase potentially their experience of imposter phenomenon in our circumstance, like in the environment between the two of us. I was thinking of when we were first talking, Dr. Walker, of Laura Osceola connecting us and everything like that. I was like, okay, so Laura has positioned you in this certain way to me and kind of was like, you two should talk. And I was like, okay, we're talking, you know? But then like learning all about your history and your experiences, it's like, you know, my comment like, wow, I should just call you Dr. Walker. Cause you know, cause it was like, wow. You know, so kind of changing that understanding. I was wondering, when we approach imposter syndrome as a topic, and we're working to dismantle that for the receiver in our conversation, how should we approach another human in a way that doesn't create an environment of imposter phenomenon for them?
Star, would you talk about that a lot? Because I know that we need to talk about how.
Sure. I think the important thing is, you know, just like I think with all these conversations, not just with IP, but just in general with these conversations, it's just the most important thing is just not to make any assumptions, like literally to just ask the question, right? So that's why we asked the beginning, like, do you think you have IP? Because, you know, and kind of having people reflect and then go from there. I think broaching, you know, sort of putting it that way and, you know, having people, because, you know, like some folks were like, I'm not really sure. And then through the, you know, through the education component, through the conversations, realizing like, okay, and here's this assessment. Now it's like, okay, here's where you are. And so I think, you know, allowing people to have that discovery is important. I mean, one of the things we don't want to do, we certainly don't want to activate any stereotype threat where people may be feeling potentially like, you know, othered or feeling like they don't belong, and then essentially kind of planting the seed that they don't. So I think starting with asking the questions, well, do you think you have this? And if you're not sure, that's fine. If you think you do, that's fine. If you don't think, that's fine, but let's educate you about it. And then having the client, like that's why I think it's so important, like that data piece, right? So to have people take like, okay, now take the assessment and see, and like, you know, people were talking about, yes, the score is one thing, but to have people talk specifically about, oh, wow, the actual items on there, as I was reading them, it made me think to myself, oh, wow, I can identify those things in myself. And I think that's a much more powerful way to approach it than just, you know, than activating those things initially. So just ask the question, have no assumptions, even if you're like, well, I see that this is a, you know, a woman of color who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, whatever. Don't assume that that person has IP. Just ask them if they think, and then give them an opportunity through education and assessment to discover for themselves, because they may not, right? So I think that's part of it.
And the other part too, I think, is to say, I've had these lived experiences. Have you had the same? And then that gives them the opportunity, Because if somebody came up to you and like assuming that you are from some, not adopted, assuming that you grew up in, in an Asian household and you're like, whoa, then that could cause some conflict. But if you were to say, I've had these experiences, have you had the same? Or what are your experiences? That gives them the opportunity to say whatever they're going to say. And then that way you're not making an assumption. You're saying, this is my lived experience. What's yours? Because I mean, like I said, when that person came to me and said I was a hip hop chick, I was like, okay, I don't know if I don't think it was an insult, but I don't really know because I don't know what that means. But if someone had said, oh, you know what, I like this music, do you? And I would have said, well, I prefer classical, whatever, then that would have not been as weird as it came out to be.
Do you guys carry the QR code with you all when you meet someone? Take the test.
Right.
Scan it.
Yeah. Don't talk to me.
Do you have IP?
That's funny. That's so funny.
QR
Yeah,
code
but I think
tattoos.
but I think it's good. It's that you reconcile that within yourself. So then when you go forward and then because you have a different lived experience. I mean, we all have different lived experiences, and the key is to respect the lived experiences of others. And then you just go forward with your truth and let them come forward with their truth. And then that just makes it better with no assumptions, like no stereotypes, no thinking whatever people think.
Yeah. So, and by doing that, then you don't come in with a feeling of anxiety and that going back to that fear. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because you're fearful of hurting someone's feelings or fearful of that. And, if you just go in and truly, many times, you stick your foot in it.
Yep.
What do? You apologize. You come at it with a humble heart.
Yeah.
I think that's really kind of an important component.
Wow, I feel like we could talk all night, but I better
Yeah,
let
so
you
we're
go.
gonna let you guys go to bed. Go to sleep.
Yeah,
Go to
no,
bed.
they're on she's like in Washington. She's like 3 hours
let's go.
behind us.
I think half of it.
Already
It's the
keep going,
first time I
right?
did the Hustlers in the office. I'm literally the last one.
Oh, wow.
Makes our studios now.
Well, again, thank you all for having us. This has been really great. It's been really great.
Thank you so
All right,
much
you guys
for
have-
sharing.
Thank
And
you.
anything we can do for you, just let us know.
Please
Definitely. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Al.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
See you next
guys.
month, folks.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. Are you at work or home?
No, I'm at a Residence Inn in Eastern Washington. We're doing a career fair day tomorrow.
Oh,
So.
cool. Yeah,
Nice.